Hi everyone, here's what's bothering me today. I've mentioned it in at least two separate videos now, so it's high time we talk about, the stars of Black History Month in many Canadians' eyes, the number 2 Construction Battalion. Now, also known as the Black Battalion, number 2 Construction Battalion was authorized on the 5th of July 1916 as a segregated, non-combat unit, the first and only all-black Canadian unit in Canadian military history. Now, there's a lot of history in terms of getting it started. There's a lot there. I'm only going to really hit the main bullet points, which is that, and to no one's surprise, they had difficulty recruiting due to racism, because at this time, you had lots of people saying, oh, look, the British Empire needs bodies to put in the trenches. And lots of Black Canadians from Nova Scotia, Upper Canada, Quebec, etc., all wanted to volunteer. But recruiters were like, Black people, no, bad. So they would reject them. They would turn them away, saying it was literally, in some cases, a white man's war. That the black man was not allowed to fight and die, and despite being subjects of the British Crown. However, due to sustained appeals and protests to military officials, people finally started to relent, and it took some actual government intervention to say, okay, just start accepting people. Come on now. And so because of this, the number 2 Construction Battalion faced lots of racism, not only, before the war, but during the war. In fact, when they were first, being sent overseas to go serve in Europe, people were suggesting that they be put in a separate ship and unguarded on an escort, with no escort, so as not to, provoke conflict between people on the boats. And the higher up said, that is a spectacular waste of money, and we're not going to do that. And so over 600 Black enlisted soldiers set sail across the Atlantic on a 10-day journey with over 3,500 white people. So that must have been a fun boat ride. Now, before this, and in terms of getting started, there were eventually some white officers from Nova Scotia who said, okay, we'll lead this, all Black segregated non-combat unit. We'll try and whip them into shape, and we'll try and get people to actually recruit in Black communities and in other areas like Halifax, etc. And that proved to be initially successful, but when the conscription crisis rolls around, that makes everything worse. So because of that, all of a sudden now all able-bodied men were forced to fight. And so white people were in this uncomfortable situation of A, being forced to fight, and B, forced to fight along Black people who they despised because racism. That made for a not so pretty picture in basic training and in recruitment offices. But like I said, there's a whole separate history. If you want to learn more about that, there's way more resources for that. So the number 2 Construction Battalion had a variety of roles and responsibilities. Chiefly among them were building roads, railway tracks, as well as bridges. They were often responsible for finding and defusing landmines. They also participated in the transporting and removing of the wounded from the battlefield. They also loaded ammunition, and they were also responsible for digging and building trenches. Now, like I said, they were mostly attached to the Canadian Forestry Corps in the south of France, but there were others in a part of Normandy and somewhere else, I forget where. But this was their sort of main area in the south of France. And again, it was a non-combat role, so they were usually behind lines, only really going to the front to, again, help build and repair trenches, defuse landmines, sending ammunition, and removing the dead or the wounded from the battlefield. This is really kind of what they did throughout the war, and throughout the war, they faced a horrendous amount of racism. They were usually the very last to get their supplies, especially sort of more crucial supplies like, say, fresh socks and underwear. What supplies they did receive were usually less than what they asked for and in worse condition. And so I wish more people had that extra addendum to the number 2 Construction Battalion, because we always see it in our history books, right? It's, there was racism, but look, it's a proud part of our heritage when we allowed black people to serve in an extremely limited capacity in an entirely segregated unit in World War I, and this is a good thing, or we're trying to make it good. It's not. It's an insulting and gross part of our racist history. What they did in terms of serving their country and putting up with horrendous racism while continuing to let the war effort continue so that the Allies could win, that is, in many ways, all people could argue, a very noble thing, and shows courage on their part and persisting through just terrible, blatantly racist treatment on, the part of their supposed fellow soldiers and their higher-ups. We don't talk about this extra part that goes on to the end of how poorly they were treated and how segregated they were. And I wish more of us realized that and acknowledged that as, again, a complicated part of our complicated history. And the fact that more people don't do that is definitely what's bothering me today.